So if you have a Taurus rising, it basically means that the sign in your first house in your birth chart is Taurus. The rising sign rules over your appearance. And for me, it mostly speaks to how someone behaves. The first house rules over the self-identity, the body, your appearance. I've never seen a Taurus or a Libra rising who was unattractive. That's all I'm saying. If you want to know more about your appearance, you want to go in and look at your Venus, aka your chart ruler, which is going to be your most important planet in your birth chart. Some celebrities who have Taurus risings, first of all, will be Meg Thee Stallion. Meg Thee Stallion has Venus in her Capricorn 9th house. She most likely loves traveling, but also she's probably very wise. I would listen to her advice if I were you. I feel like she's a very grounded person. Now, Venus does not particularly enjoy being in Capricorn, so there are a little bit of struggles there, and Miley Cyrus actually has the exact same placement. Both Meg Thee Stallion and Miley Cyrus have been very polarizing in the public eye, and I feel like this has to do with the fact that their Venus is in its fall. Whenever Venus is in a sign that it loves, like Cancer, for example, it does very well, it expresses exactly what it wants. Whenever Venus is not doing so well, whenever it's in the sign of Capricorn, it can come across, with some hardships or really just like uphill battles when it comes to romance. But since it's their chart ruler, obviously uphill battles as far as it comes with their personality and, just their self-identity. Capricorn is also a sign that does really well at climbing the successful ladder. Both of these artists are going to be around for a really long time, regardless of the public opinion. Another celebrity who has a Taurus rising is Mariah Carey, and she has her Venus in the 12th house, which is really interesting to me because Mariah Carey also has a very huge reputation, but her Venus being in the 12th house, the 12th house is very hidden. So there's a lot of her core behavior is very hidden from herself and from us. So there's really just a lot that we don't know about her and that we're probably not supposed to know. But anyways, let's get back into your overall reading. Taurus is a fixed earth sign. So the fixed signs are not a huge fan of moving around. The fixed signs want what they want it their way, and if they want to change, it has to be their idea. Of all of the signs, they tend to be very stable and more focused on security than trying to do everything in life at once. Taurus is also an earth sign. The element of earth in astrology basically rules over material things that you can touch, things that you can see, things that you can hold, possess, and have, which is why the earth signs kind of have the stereotype of being selfish sometimes. Earth signs typically are very creative whenever it comes to the making and spending of money. This is also interesting because Taurus is also known as the sign of money. The energy in the second house in everyone's birth chart has Taurus energy in it, which rules over money, which is why whenever you want to look at someone's finances, you always look at their second house. But with that being said, I feel like Taurus risings are more predisposed to, gaining money, but also spending it, because that's, one of the drawbacks of having a Taurus placement is that it's going to be really easy for you to get in these zones where you just want to spend a lot of money. A lot of Taurus people tend to think, okay, I'm making so much of it, I'll spend a lot of it. Taurus rules over the throat and the body, so a lot of Taurus risings or Taurus placements tend to have a very prominent collarbone area, prominent throat area. But either way, the first house of self-identity, body, it rules over your self-esteem as well. So Taurus in general, no matter what your usual temperament is, it's going to stay consistent. So whether you're very confident, you'll probably stay confident, throughout your life. And any planet that you have in the first house is really going to give you a lot of insight into what you look like, insight into how you feel about yourself. Taurus risings also have Scorpio in the 7th house. The 7th house in traditional astrology rules over marriage, it rules over partnerships, relationships. The first house is more of the self, and the 7th house is more of the other. So Taurus risings tend to be attracted to people who have Scorpio-like traits because Scorpio's in the 7th house. Scorpio-like traits, people who are very secretive, partners who are obviously very sexual. That's something that Scorpio rules over, which I'll get into the sexual aspect of your chart later. People who are very wealthy, Scorpio is also one of the signs associated with money as well. It's very intense partnerships. And having a 7th house that's ruled by Mars though, Mars is one of the planets that we in astrology refer to as a malefic. And sometimes it can start up a little bit of trouble. So depending whether you're born in the daytime or at nighttime, Mars will give you more or less trouble. But if you're born in the daytime and you have Scorpio in the 7th house, aka being a Taurus rising, arguments with your partners over your life, throughout your life, or even your spouse, are going to be a little bit more pronounced. Since I'm telling you this, you're going to be a little bit more equipped to know okay, I'm going to be predisposed to these types of things. What should I, work on? But your 7th house is also ruled by Pluto, because Scorpio is not only ruled by Mars, but it's also ruled by Pluto. Pluto ruled 7th house can kind of mean that your relationships over time, whether you're married or just in long-term relationship, your relationships are all going to have a different flavor over time, whether that's one relationship with one person going through dramatic transformations a lot, or each person that you date bringing something different to the table and completely transforming you. If you are Gen Z, you probably have your Pluto in the 8th house in Sagittarius, and having Pluto in the 8th house is a place that it likes to be. Pluto does its best in the 8th house. There's Pluto energy within the 8th house topics, so having this here is actually a pretty strong placement in my opinion. Taurus risings over their lifetime can see themselves gaining like a lot of power through money, but also having their money be controlled by a certain partner. Pluto rules over the extremes, so it can rule over the extreme of like having a shit ton of power from all this money, but also having your power taken away from having no money. But either way, Scorpios are most likely very attracted to you, and Scorpio placements more often than not will be more likely to want to give you more commitment in a relationship than other placements will. Taurus risings have a Gemini 2nd house. This is where we get a little bit concerned because the sign of Gemini, it's easily shaken up. Gemini is a mutable air sign representing communication and mindset, and mutable meaning consistently changing. So having a mutable sign in the 2nd house can kind of mean that the way that you handle money throughout your life is always going to change. It might be a little bit harder for Taurus risings to stick to a budget, but it's also a little bit easier for Taurus risings to adapt to like new budget changes. Just lots of changes in the finances is what I'm getting for y'all. But Gemini is also a very smart sign. It's ruled by Mercury. Mercury is the planet of communication, of thinking, and everything like that. So I believe that Taurus risings are very creative whenever it comes to creating money. So you might want to look at the Mercury placement in your birth chart. It'll give you a lot more insight on, your personal finances. The 2nd house is more of your wallet, right? It's like what you have. So like the money that you have physically, you can touch it, you can go out and spend it today. And it's the money that you make over time. But the 8th house, on the other hand, is the house of other people's money and, your partner's money and investments, royalties, if you're a writer, if you're an artist, it's going to be, all this compensation that you get from other people. So having Pluto in the 8th house is a very strong placement, but it can also, bring about partners who want to control you financially. Also just a very charged sex life. The 8th house rules over spirituality, it rules over other people's money, and it also rules over your sex life. So, and I have a feeling for Taurus risings, it's going to be a huge extreme that you're on. So either, you're very empowered sexually, or, you can tend to have power taken away from you sexually, or, over life. This is where we look at things like slut shaming, personal sexual experiences, and of course I won't get into those in a general reading for all rising signs, but just a very interesting sex life in general. So you definitely want to look at the aspects to Pluto and also to Mars for more insight on your 8th house. Taurus risings also have Cancer in the 3rd house. So the 3rd house is all about how you communicate. It's about the people that you see on a daily basis, your siblings, your neighbors, people that you see a lot. 3rd house also represents short-term travel, so like 10, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever you consider short, that would be your short-term travel. So usually during Cancer season, Taurus risings probably see themselves traveling a little bit more. Having Cancer in the 3rd house is very interesting because the way that you communicate is going to be heavily reliant on what your moon sign is and the house that your moon is in and the aspects to your moon. Because Cancer is ruled by the moon, and thus the moon is your 3rd house ruler. So the way that you communicate is going to be directly related to your emotions. So I have a feeling that Taurus risings are not very good at hiding how they feel about things, but also Taurus rising's way of communicating is going to be very heartfelt, very sweet, coming from the heart, very innocent. That's all Cancer energy. And obviously your relationship to your mother is going to have a huge impact on the way that you communicate as well, with that Cancer influence. Now, the 9th house rules over long-term travels, also college, higher learning, higher education, spirituality to an extent, what are your core beliefs? The 9th house is sometimes regarded as the house of God. Taurus risings having Capricorn in the 9th house means that you're very serious about traveling. Obviously, you probably take on lots of caution whenever traveling. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, meaning Saturn is your 9th house ruler, meaning that a lot of lessons that you learn can come from things like social media. A lot of your hardest lessons can come from questioning what you really believe on the inside, what you really believe about life and spirituality and life and death. Lots of hard lessons learned through traveling as well. Now, Taurus risings have Leo in the 4th house. 4th house is all about your childhood, home, family, and personal life. It's not hidden like the 8th house and the 12th 12 houses are, but it is the most private part of the chart. So people who know you the most intimately are going to see this Leo 4th house of you. So in your home life, you might be the type of person who is very excitable, who is very attention loving, attention grabbing for your family, almost like the center of attention in your family. Your 4th house is ruled by the sun, so definitely look at your sun placement to get a little bit more insight on your home and family. But you most likely also have a family who loves throwing parties, who loves just having a good time, who loves getting dressed and going out to like a nice family meal, things like that. Directly opposite of the 4th house is the 10th house of career, public image, reputation, all of that good stuff. And the thing about the 10th house is that it's right at the top of the chart, which is literally seen by everybody. The 10th house is where you have the midheaven, which is the direct point, the very highest point in your birth chart, which rules over, how you're seen to other people. I'm not going to say the mask that you wear to other people, but it's more of like the curated version of yourself that you put on display. Your 10th house is what's being activated when you're posting on social media. When you start to get a reputation, people start to create conversations about you. That's your 10th house being activated by that. Now, having Aquarius in the 10th house, Aquarius energy is very innovative. It's very smart, very quick realizations about the career throughout life. But Aquarius is ruled not only by Saturn, but also by Uranus. So Saturn is the planet of time, of course. It rules over things that last for a very long time. So I see Taurus risings having these very long lasting careers, but also these very quickly changeable, innovative careers. That's Uranus energy. Uranus is the planet of very quick changes. It rules over innovation. Whatever field that Taurus risings tend to land themselves into, most likely they will be the type of person who is very cutting edge in that field. If you're a Gen Z person, you most likely have Uranus and Neptune in these houses. Having Uranus and Neptune in the 10th house is very important because Uranus brings a lot of very crazy, sudden impacts, sudden changes in your career. Sudden developments, sudden losses, sudden gains, things like that. A sudden change of path in the career. Neptune in the 10th house is interesting because I've noticed that a lot of celebrities tend to have Neptune on an angled house. The angled houses are the 1st house, 4th house, 7th house, and 10th house. Now, having a Neptune on either one of these, it's very prominent. Neptune rules over celebrities. It rules over acting, filming. It rules over creativity, but it also rules over addiction. Having both of these planets in the house that's seen by everyone, Taurus risings can almost be seen as the type of person who's a bit addicted to their work, addicted to their reputation, addicted to their social standing in a way. Having any placement in the 10th house is going to make you very in touch with the collective of the world. Either way, Taurus rising can be seen as very smart people, very innovative, but also very mysterious. Neptune does rule over mystery, and any time that someone has Neptune on an angled house, it makes people very curious about that area of their life. And having it in the 10th house means that people are always going to be very curious about, what you do for your career. They're always going to be very curious about who you are to other people, your reputation, things like that. Now, Taurus risings have Virgo in the 5th house. The 5th house rules over romance, creativity, basically just how you have fun, and also lighthearted sexual relationships. So I did speak about sexual relationships earlier on in the reading with the 8th house, but the 8th house is more about this kind of soul-bearing sexual relationships type of thing. But the 5th house is more of lighthearted, kind of fling energy. And it also rules over children. So anytime there's a Virgo transit, it's going to be a lot more likely for Taurus risings to, get pregnant or, have a child or things like that. I'm not going to say this is always the case. You might have a child who ends up having a Virgo placement. Having Virgo in the 5th house just means that it's almost like you really want everything to be perfect when you're tweaking, or releasing any sort of creative project. If you're going out for a night out, for example, you almost want that situation to be very perfect. You want to control the situation, especially your lighthearted romantic relationships. You might have a tendency towards dating people who are Virgos. Virgo energy is going to be very attracted to you, especially because their Virgo placement would most likely be trining whatever Taurus placement you have. The energy is going to flow well between you and a lot of Virgo people. You're going to have a lot of fun around Virgo people. But your 5th house is also ruled by Mercury. Mercury being the planet of thinking, communication, mindset. Whatever it is that you do for fun is going to be very smart, very, very intellectual. You might turn to teaching, especially if your chart ruler is in the 9th house or something. Now, directly opposing the 5th house is the 11th house. The 11th house rules over these long-term friends, people who kind of think very similarly to you, communities that you belong to. For example, if you belong to a church community, if you belong to the spiritual community, if you were part of the One Direction fandom, that would all fall underneath your 11th house. Astrology also does fall into the categories of the 11th house as well. So, during Pisces transits, you might find yourself reading up a little bit more on your horoscopes and zodiac signs than other times. Having Pisces in the 11th house just means that Taurus risings tend to get along with Pisces energy, as friends. The type of communities that you belong to are going to be very heartfelt, but also Pisces is a sign that's ruled by both Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter ruling over abundance and like good luck and all the good things in life. So you most likely are exposed to that throughout your life, friends who are very go with the flow, but also friends who do need a good bit of alone time because that is that Piscean energy. Now, Pisces also being ruled by Neptune, a planet that does represent addiction. You might have friends who have addiction issues. You might be the type of person who doesn't use any sort of drug or alcohol or get under the influence until you're in a social setting. You might be more of a social drinker as compared to like a drinker like at home, or whatever the case is. You also might be the type of person who might belong to a community of recovering type of addicts like Alcoholic Anonymous or something like that. And obviously this isn't going to be for every single Taurus rising. It's going to show up differently in everybody's life depending on what your placements are, the aspects of your 11th house ruler. So the aspects to Jupiter and Neptune will give you a lot more insight on the types of people that you stay friends with, and how you act in your long-term friends. But either way, you're the type of person who is very heartfelt whenever it comes to your friends, and you tend to attract very heartfelt people to you. Taurus risings also have Libra in the 6th house. Now this is super important because Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus is your chart ruler as a Taurus rising. Having Libra in the 6th house means that for Taurus risings, you most likely enjoy a work environment that's very pretty. You like to have a very organized desk, a very well-decorated desk. You might enjoy, putting on makeup every day to go to work, because the 6th house does rule over your job, your daily routine, the places that you go every single day. It rules over your health and fitness. So, Taurus risings might be the type of people who work out, maybe not necessarily because they enjoy it, but because they know it's going to make their body look better. That's that Libra energy there. Libra is an air sign, it's very communicative. So you might be a very friendly person in your work environment. Having Libra in the 6th house of work might mean that a lot of Taurus risings, lean towards being interested in being a lawyer. Obviously not every Taurus rising in the world is a lawyer, but a lot of you guys probably love it if you are, because it's probably right up your alley. You get to wear all the pretty clothes, and you also get to fight for justice. Directly across from the 6th house is the 12th house. Now, Taurus people tend to have an Aries 12th house. The 12th house is a house that is very hidden. It's a house that deals with spirituality. It deals with, the subconscious, mental health, but also isolation. So having Aries in the 12th house is very interesting because Aries is ruled by Mars, and having Mars ruling the 12th house can bring a lot of trouble to, the inner subconscious. You might be the type of person who has anger issues without realizing them. You might be the type of person who's not comfortable with openly expressing whenever you're mad or whenever something's upsetting you. Flying off the handle is probably not something that Taurus risings are huge on. Now, the thing about Taurus and anger is that Taurus anger kind of builds up over time and then it kind of breaks out. So Taurus risings might notice that over time, like little things will bother them and it won't seem like it bothers them until it's at the boiling point and the pot's ready to run over, the anger is ready to run over, and it's ready to spill out. So a lot of Taurus risings might not even realize a lot of their anger issues until, they're already pissed off about it and saying something about it. Obviously, your Mars placement is going to have a huge impact on this, and whether you're born in the daytime or nighttime is going to let us know whether these arguments, these things that come up are more detrimental or if they're more reasonable. Having Aries in the 12th house means that you're very passionate about mental health, the type of person who uses fitness as a way of coping with their mental health, because obviously Aries does rule over, the body, working out, things like that. A lot of Taurus risings might actually take to fitness not only because it makes them look good with that 6th house energy of Libra in there, but also because it makes you feel better. It keeps you more focused, more of a clarity type of energy with Aries in the 12th house. Now, if you would like to know more about your entire birth chart, you can book a birth chart reading on my website, destinyjanae.com, which is linked in the down below. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all Taurus risings later.